Hi, I'm Ty. I work for CO2 Australia as a carbon service provider. The Mallee plantings that you see here were started in the early 2000s. There was a scheme through the New South Wales government to do emissions reduction for large emitters. And so CO2 Australia and other carbon service providers started figuring out how to do carbon emissions reduction. And so that's where these projects started out. So when you go to start your first carbon project and you'll be looking at what type of planting you want to do, there's really only two options. One's called mixed species environmental planting, and that will be native species native to the region where your land is located. There's some restrictions there based on rainfall and types of species, but for the most part, your carbon service provider will help you pick species that will grow really well in your area. The other option is what's called a Mallee planting, and that's where you plant just select species of Mallee eucalypt trees. And those are trees where we have really good metrics on their growth rates and their carbon stocks. And if those trees are planted, you do sequester a little bit more carbon than you would under a mixed species environmental planting. And that's because there's more carbon when you're planting mostly trees as opposed to a mixture of trees and shrubs. When you do a carbon project on your property, it's really up to you how you want the trees to be orientated and how you want them to be located within the land. There is some restrictions and specifications within the type of vegetation method that you choose to use on your property. Under the environmental planting method, the options are belt plantings or block plantings. Belt plantings, which are like long lines of trees within your property, can be really any length, but the width and the spacing of the trees is specified by the method. People would do them along a fence line, or you could do them in the middle between some croppings. Block plantings are what you would picture of a typical forest. It can be any size or shape, but it's full of trees, and you could plant them through your whole paddock, or you can specify portions of your property. The block planting has less rules about how the trees are located within it.
Our name's Steve Edgerton. We're roughly 35 kilometres southwest of Condobolin. My dominant enterprise here is grazing, both sheep and cattle. There is two paddocks where there are water catchments to a dam that does have the trees following the water drains that were planted reasonably close to the drain. It probably helps with some erosion on the top side. The trees probably benefit from the extra drink if there's water in the drain.
Paul Cinderberry, Glen, Bobadar, Central West New South Wales. Yeah, we run a mix of cropping and livestock here. I think personally I would look at doing shelter belts around the edges of paddocks and just leave it at that. Enough room around the ends of the rows to get machinery around the ends of the rows, the headlands against the fences. So I suppose in that way, what future fencing might you want to be doing or changing, and make sure you've got enough room there. If you're going to do rows of plantations, then make sure you look at the spacing. The rows are about 70 metres apart. As it turns out, that's not great for us with a 12-metre planter. We've sort of got 5.5 runs between the rows. And we've got a 36-metre boom spray, once again, 72 metres, so we're overlapping. Also, you can't even get right into the edge anyway. The other plantings further over are more like 120 metres, so that'll work better, 10 runs between the rows. So yeah, just less overlap, less wastage.
They're based on 100 metres between the rows of trees. There are 6 rows of trees in each. If I was to change anything, I probably would have set them up at possibly a 200-metre interval, but that's not necessary to say that I would have done it in every paddock. Then your lesser productivity areas, which there is an area up on the northeast corner where I think they're at roughly 50-metre intervals, just in an area that is really only suitable for grazing. The CO2 trees are planted on a north-south direction. I guess the main reason being that the wind blows from the west or the southwest, so it's there to try and slow down the wind sweeping effect. The advantage that I found when I first inspected the property was, with being a livestock producer, the shade and the shelter for the livestock. Another change that I possibly would make would just be to have vehicle access at a midway point through the longer rows, simply for the ease of when you're moving stock. They can go in through the trees, but it makes it a bit hard to get a ute or a vehicle of that size to traverse through the rows.
We can get 4-wheelers and 2-wheelers through there, but you wouldn't get a side-by-side. Now, if you've got every time you've got to go through a tree, you've got to go 300 metres that way to get a side-by-side back round again, that's going to be a big impact.
Anyone that's contemplating establishing the trees as part of their their farm plan, my only advice is to reach out for information so you can establish what you feel will work best in your situation.